Hello and welcome to Discovering True Health, your weekly deep dive into health and wellness. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before I get started, as always, please hit the subscribe button. It helps us out a lot, and you'll stay up to date on all our upcoming shows. You can also check out additional information on our website, Instagram, and Facebook. Those links are all below in the description. So today we're going to wrap up our series on the fluoridation of America. If you haven't yet read my series, An Epic Times, America the Fluoridated, definitely go check it out. There's a link below. Today we're going to be learning effective strategies to reduce fluoride toxicity and how to remove the industrial chemical fluoride from our tap water. And because the industrial fluoride additive is not only in 75% of the US water supply, but also contaminates our air, our soil, our food, beverages, and pharmaceuticals, as well as dental products, we'll also be learning how to eliminate and minimize avoidable sources of fluoride. So my guest joining me today is Richard Sauerheber. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Okay, Sauerheber.
Sauerheber. Thank you. He's a research scientist and former NIH principal investigator and has his Ph.D. in chemistry. Richard has done extensive research on the chemistry of fluoride and best practices for reducing toxicity, minimizing exposure, and removing it from tap water. He's also published 65 papers and books, including 6 on fluoride toxicology and 2 on the COVID pandemic, and has published several articles on the nature of light. And he discovered what is called synchronous aberration. I hope I said that correctly. Synchronous aberration. And he demonstrated that Newton, not Einstein, is correct about the nature of time. And he's now writing about the speed of light measurements that demonstrate that the universe of matter is not expanding from a central Big Bang point in space. So
At least at a high rate of speed that people have surmised.
So fascinating. I'm looking forward to reading these. He just sent me all his articles. So he's not only an expert in explaining fluoride, but he's also deeply involved in improving what's taught in our universities and colleges. And Richard's also petitioned the Food and Drug Administration to ban fluoride, which ended up in a book-long size petition done over an 8-year period from 2007 to 2015. So Richard, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Anything I can do to help. And I like your name, Christy Praise. Praise is pretty cool.
Thank you. Yes, I always say it's like praise the Lord. Now you ended up sending a petition to the FDA, and it was interesting what the outcome was. Can you share a little bit more with us how that process went and how it ended up?
Well, the petition was originally accepted for review. I think it was back in 2007. That's about the time our water began to be fluoridated from Los Angeles. It's delivered down here. We've been free of fluoride for all the time before that. So the petition was accepted, and they gave me a phone call and said so, and they congratulated me that it was accepted. And I said, "Oh, you're going to ban fluoridation?" And they go, "Oh no, that just means it's going to go to the review committee." Well, it was a long, arduous 8-year-long review committee process, and it involved about 110 supplemental letters, petition for reconsideration, another 20 pages. This went on for a long time. The final conclusion was that the FDA concluded that the fluoride is toxic at any concentration, and it's not permitted to be added intentionally into foods. It's considered too toxic to be added to food. And that the substance needs to be regulated under the Toxic Substances Control Act. But the FDA does not think that its job is to regulate public drinking water. But, the truth of the matter is every American has to follow the Toxic Substances Control Act. It's a law. But they want the EPA to do it because the EPA traditionally is involved in regulating contamination in public drinking water. So it ended up being a bunch of paper pushing, and nobody did anything. also wrote to the Office of Drinking Water, the EPA, after that, and told them what the FDA said. The EPA wrote back and said, well, no, we don't regulate stuff that's added into the water on purpose. We just regulate accidental contamination that's spilled into the water. So they thought the FDA and the CDC should regulate. So nobody is really regulating. It's just being done. And it's being done for based on reasons that were extrapolated from data that were misunderstood back in the 1930s. So it's a pretty sad state of affairs. It's really an embarrassment for the country, but we're here to help people understand it.
No, I appreciate you taking the time because you're highly educated in the chemistry of this, and you've been at this battle for so many years. And it's so crazy how when you just were explaining that everybody, all these agencies are just kind of passing the buck and they're promoting it. Like the CDC actually gives out awards for participation in the fluoride programs. And they're constantly, they just had an article, I think, that came out recently, but they're all promoting it. The PHS sets these recommendations, but nobody takes responsibility at the same time.
Oh yeah, they requested. That's why a lot of states, health departments actually mandated for different states, mandate fluoridation in large cities, which is illegal because the Safe Drinking Water Act says that states can be no less restrictive on not allowing a requirement to add any chemical into public drinking water other than to sanitize the water. So it's illegal what states are doing when they make a mandate. It originally was illegal to add fluoride intentionally into the water after the Safe Drinking Water Act was passed, the original version, because it was actually written to help stop the spread of fluoridation across the country. But that was adulterated when people who really believe in fluoride, and the CDC, Oral Health Division, and dentists really do believe in it. They got the legislation to be modified to have a paragraph exception to allow fluoridation. But it still is illegal to require it. That's many states are doing. So
it was originally written to stop the spread of fluoridating water across the US, but then some agencies and pro fluoride organizations came in and changed the verbiage within the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Basically added an inserted paragraph to make an exception for fluoride, but it's illegal. If I went out right now to a reservoir that uses drinking water and I poured vitamin C in there, I would be arrested. You can't do that. You can't add food, you can't add nutrients, you can't add minerals, you can't add a banana peel into public drinking water. It's illegal. According to Safe Drinking Water Act, the only chemical you're allowed to put in water, and it's by officials that have the know-how to do so, are chemicals that sanitize the water so you don't end up with typhus or something. That's it. You're not allowed to add anything into public water supplies. And yet, fluoride is allowed because, it's strange beginnings in 1945 when it was really the military that wanted to get rid of a bunch of waste, sodium fluoride, from industry. That got together with the dentists who misunderstood some data on natural calcium fluoride in the water and dental caries. So they thought, wow, what a great way to solve people's dental issues. Let's just dump this sodium fluoride into Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they did it. And, a lot of things happened on that front. And if you really want to know why, if you really believe that fluoride is able to reduce dental decay when you eat it, you gotta read this book right here by Philip Sutton, the expert dentist and statistician, proved what's wrong with all of the original tests in the 40s and 50s.
What's it called?
It's called The Greatest Fraud, Fluoridation.
Okay.
His original book was Errors of Omission and Commission. It's very clear what's going on with the Grand Rapids stuff when you read that. But that experiment was halted prematurely because the dentist thought that it was working, but really, fluoride, when it gets into your blood, wreaks all kinds of havoc that you won't even notice. You won't feel it, but it does things to you. And when you're a kid with growing teeth developing, trying to erupt out of your gums, drinking fluoride, having that at about 0.2 parts per million in your blood, delays teeth eruption. And a missing tooth was counted as an absence of cavities in the original data. So they go, this is working. Look at our numbers. Look at all these low cavities rates in Kingston. In Grand Rapids compared to Kingston.
The teeth hadn't grown in yet?
Yeah, and they were so happy with what was going on that they just deemed that, well, that's it. We don't need to study it anymore. It confirms what was done by this Dr. Dean in the 30s. Well, Dean was wrong. It's a whole nother issue. He was looking at, dental caries in different cities across the Southwest, and there were different levels of calcium fluoride. And he thought that the kids that had drinking water at 1 part per million calcium fluoride, 1 part per million fluoride natural, he thought that they had fewer cavities. But if you look at all of the data, as presented by a good book written by Dr. Conant, The Case Against Fluoride, if you look at all the data, you'll see that he was just misled by only looking at happenstance. It wasn't necessarily cherry picked, but he picked data that gave you the impression that, oh, look, caries go down right over here when you're at 1 ppm, and they're higher over here when it's 0.2 ppm. So he thought 1 ppm, that's a great dose to put in there to lower dental decay. But when you look at all of it, even all the way up to 6 parts per million, there is no actual decrease in dental decay. You can eat fluoride all day long. It's not going to reduce dental decay, in spite of the vast literature that claims otherwise. It's everywhere. But these are the actual data that from which he took some samples and made the conclusion, which is completely erroneous. Now, what does happen is that every single city that is fluoridated, without exception, has an increased incidence of dental fluorosis in the children. That goes up as a function of the fluoride concentration in the water. There's no doubt about that. But there's no trend on decreasing dental decay. And what dental fluorosis actually is, it's enamel hypoplasia, because the fluoride in the blood also interferes with the ability of the enzymes during enamel formation to remove the albumin. So the albumin gets stuck in there, and then the dental enamel in that spot is opaque. It's not crystal clear glass like normal enamel is. And so it's a thinner enamel, and it's actually a condition called enamel hypoplasia. That's evidence of that it's proof that you've been poisoned with fluoride. So that goes up, and even dental agencies today agree and admit that every single city that's fluoridated, without exception, has more dental fluorosis cases.
Right.
And why wouldn't they? What do you think fluoride is?
Right. And so what I think is interesting to talk about, just to start before we get into the toxicity and the chemistry of it, which is so fascinating. So everybody can kind of get a basic understanding. Because I remember when I reached out to the CDC, they said, they gave me they wouldn't answer my questions. They just sent me a little kind of blanket statement, but then they followed up saying, fluoride is a naturally occurring, and I don't know if they called it a nutrient, but it's naturally occurring. But so it's not the natural occurring fluoride that's in our water. It is a chemical fluoride. Can you kind of talk about the differences and what we need to know about that?
Yeah, well, the fluoride ion is the fluoride ion, no matter where it is, whether it's natural or in a synthetic compound. But the difference is the environment that it's in. Toxicity is determined by its environment. If you look at the salmon collapse that occurred when there was a dump of contaminant fluoride into the river up in Oregon, well, the salmon collapse that occurred was proven later by the University of Oregon to have been caused by the fluoride. Because in the ocean, where fluoride is at 1 part per million, it's accompanied with hundreds of parts per million calcium and magnesium. Salmon live out there in abundance, no problem at all because of fluoride. It means nothing. But as soon as they try to navigate upstream where it's soft water, no calcium, and the fluoride level is only 0.3 parts per million, and the fish are narcotized, they don't even know where they're going. They can't navigate. So it was a complete collapse caused by the fluoride in the fresh water. Fluoride does not belong in fresh drinking water, as proven just by the salmon.
Yeah. And now I read one of your studies and your research, and it's pretty clear that really understanding the chemistry of fluoride, it's where it's at when it's, comes to the toxicity of it. And you published a 2013 study in the Journal of Environmental and Public Health that discussed how the mineral content and solubility, just like you mentioned, and the pH levels affect toxicity. So let's start with solubility. How does naturally occurring fluoride, which is the calcium fluoride, differ from the chemical fluoride that's added to the water in the US? And how is toxicity affected by solubility?
Well, all soluble fluorides are synthetics. They don't exist in nature. And for example, sodium fluoride, fluosilicic acid, fluoride in there, those are all industrial chemicals. They're fully soluble. They're so soluble, they don't even have a solubility product constant in any textbook, because you can load them into water any high concentration you feel like. But natural calcium fluoride has a KSP, a solubility product constant, about 5 times 10 to the minus 11, which means that the calcium times the fluoride squared that can coexist in the water is limited. You can only get up to about maybe 8 or 9 parts per million fluoride in the water when you're treating it with calcium fluoride, because it's just not soluble. Sodium fluoride is a completely different matter. You can get any level you want, and that's what happened up in Hooper Bay, Alaska. They were fluoridating the Eskimo town in Hooper Bay on the soft water Yukon River with sodium fluoride. And so when there was an overfeed, the level got so high, it was up to an estimated about 100 parts per million. And a Coast Guardsman there, he was only 42. He was killed. He was thirsty. He drank the water. They killed him with a heart block because his blood level got up to about 3 or 4 parts per million fluoride. It could never have been done with natural calcium fluoride. You can't. It's not soluble enough to poison someone like that. So it's the same fluoride, but it's not the same effect of the fluoride. It depends on the environment that it's in.
Right.
I mean,
and solubility, just to so everybody understand, that's how what your body will absorb. So if it's fully soluble, you can absorb more, and if it's not soluble, you can't. Is that correct?
Yeah, Friedman and Gilman expert text on the pharmaceutical basis of therapeutics, you will find in there a clean statement that all soluble fluorides are toxics, and readily soluble, insoluble fluorides are not. The toxicity of fluoride depends on its solubility. That's a statement right out of Goodman and Gilman, which is in every medical school library. But medical schools don't even go into fluoride much. So, yeah, I mean, the real problem is that people just do not want to dig in the weeds to figure out what's really the truth is. We have chemistry teachers here. They come out of school. They think they know everything. They start teaching about fluorine, fluoride. I mean, it's sad. Fluorine, everyone agrees, has a high electronegativity. And if you had fluorine, which is a gas, and it reacts with any substance, I put a question mark there, it can react with anything, it will steal electrons from that substance, oxidizing it to a positive charge, producing fluoride from the fluorine. So fluorine does not exist in nature, does not exist. You can generate it in a lab with a lot of difficulty, but what are you going to store it in? What do you store it in when it reacts with everything? Fluorine does not exist in nature, period. There's textbooks that say fluorine is the 13th most abundant element in the universe. Well, that's not really correct. We should say fluoride is, because all fluorine atoms in nature that do not exist really exist as fluoride. If it didn't, it would in the next moment, because fluorine doesn't exist in a vacuum.
And that's where it gets tricky, because they use this word fluoride so interchangeably. Even when I was like looking back into history, I was like, there's fluorine, there's fluoride, but fluorine is actually, like you said, it's the chemical, that gas that comes out of the waste byproduct of these like aluminum manufacturers and
HF. That's HF. You're thinking of HF, hydrofluoric acid. And fluorine does not exist anywhere unless in a special lab that uses electrocution type methods of materials to try to produce the fluorine. It's really difficult to make, and you can't store it anyway, so why bother to make it? Fluorine does not really exist. Fluoride does. Now, the difference is huge. Fluorine is recognized as the most electronegative element in the universe. It abstracts electrons from anything. Nobody beats it. But fluoride has no electronegativity at all. None. In fact, it's electropositive, which is why it seeks out positive charges, but especially the divalent, double positive charge calcium ion, which is why it sticks in your bones and you can't get it out. So fluoride has nothing to do with fluorine in terms of toxicity. Completely different materials, completely different. And the fluoride does exist in nature, but only as calcium fluoride and fluorite, elements like that, minerals like that. It doesn't exist as sodium fluoride in nature. It doesn't exist as fluosilicic acid fluoride in nature. It exists as, like I said, fluoride, or minerals like that. I mean, what you were mentioning was, yeah, most of the chemical that's used now to fluoridate people with and through the public water supply is fluosilicic acid, H2SiF6. That comes from the pollution scrubbers from fertilizer plants that use sulfuric acid to dissolve rock. One of the byproducts is hydrofluoric acid, HF gas, the most corrosive acid that there is. It's a weak acid, but it's extremely corrosive. You drop a drop on your shoe, it eats through the leather in your shoe, eats into your foot. It's a weak acid because it doesn't ionize very well, but it sure does damage because of its extremely minute size. So HF is trapped in these pollution scrubbers when you couldn't leave it in the fertilizer, but they wash it down, put it in a water solution. You've got H2SiO6, and instead of figuring out where to dump this stuff in a toxic hazardous waste site, they just sell it to water districts and they just dump it directly into our drinking water. Not my drinking water because I won't drink it, but most people's drinking water in the United States, and it's an embarrassment. It's a national embarrassment.
And how does so that we have the fluorosilicic acid, then we have the natural calcium fluoride. How does the role of calcium and other minerals play a role into the toxicity of what's in our water compared to what this natural occurring one?
Well, for example, the salmon that I mentioned in the ocean where there's tons of calcium, fluoride is not toxic to the salmon, but in fresh water, it is very toxic, even at only 0.3. So, the environment that fluoride is in determines its toxicity. An antidote, I had a student once who liked to eat fluoride toothpaste, sodium fluoride toothpaste, because they made it taste like bubble gum and mint and all this stuff. She would sneak into the bathroom at night and eat it. Well, she ended up years later with elbow joints she could hardly even bend. And the thing is, fluoride acute lethality, acute poisonings from fluoride that have killed people are not rare. Like the Hooper Bay disaster, that was, an accident based on a fluoridation overfeed when he was killed. But it's known that if you've ingested a bunch of soluble industrial fluoride, to drink a whole bunch of milk and get that calcium in there quick to get it to be so that it's not assimilated into the bloodstream as well. If you drink a bunch of milk with a dose of fluoride, you're not going to get it into the blood as easily as if you just take the fluoride without any calcium. Obviously, because as I mentioned, fluoride is not electronegative at all. It's electropositive, and it can't wait to get near calcium. So there's a lot of calcium in milk, maybe 350 parts per million in cow's milk. So that's what's used as an antidote in clinical medicine when you've been poisoned with fluoride. If for some reason you can't do a stomach pump. Now I don't want to go into the details about issues that can crop up with that. Some of that was in my Ph.D. article, but I hope that answers your question there.
Oh,
calcium. Yeah. Calcium basically causes the assimilation of the fluoride from the gut after you ingest it into the bloodstream. Because the work that I did, one of the main studies I did in that article there, let me see if I can
so it actually goes in our body and it kind of attaches to our calcium in our bodies, and it kind of eats up our calcium or depletes our calcium.
Sticks to the calcium. Right. I don't know where it went here, but anyway, when the fluoride level is known, when there's a certain fluoride level in a water sample, you can use a fluoride meter and measure it, make sure it's still there. But then if you start adding weak acid to it, like some vinegar or something, it converts the fluoride into HF, and then the fluoride meter can't detect it. So at lower and lower pHs, higher acidity, the fluoride level is not detectable by the meter because it's no longer free fluoride, it's HF. So that's what happens in the stomach. In the stomach at about pH 3, the fluoride, most of it is converted when there's not sufficient tons of calcium around. The fluoride is converted to HF, hydrofluoric acid, and that's unstoppable. It just goes right through the gastric membrane into the bloodstream.
So the more acidic our body is, the more toxic fluoride will be in our bodies.
Well, you don't want to say that. It's just that automatically our stomach is acidic. And so the fluoride is converted to HF in the stomach, and that's how it gains entry into the blood. Once it's in the blood, you're back to neutral pH 7.3 around there. So it's no longer HF anymore, but it's gained entry that way. It turned into HF to get in. Now it dissociates again in the blood, and it's all fluoride again.
And now people were asking about hard water versus soft water. How do those two types of water affect fluoride toxicity?
Well, just like the salmon, ocean water is really hard water, and the salmon could care less about the fluoride. Soft water in the Columbia River, totally different story. Put fluoride in there, very toxic. So, we have states in the United States where the groundwater is soft, considered soft because it doesn't have much calcium in it, and they're more susceptible to the effects of fluoride in the drinking water when it's dumped in. And we have hard water states that would be more protected from the toxic effects of fluoride. So that's the problem there. I mean, I had for a long time, because I was involved with the FDA so much, and I have my own job, nobody pays me to do this stuff on fluoride. I have my own job to do. I was never able until recently to finally do a study that I wanted to do. I'm the fourth person now to publish that fluoride actually is increasing the incidence of infant mortality in states in the United States that have soft water. I always wanted to check it out to see if there was an effect of soft water states versus hard water states, and there is. And why it's no surprise, but it's very disturbing. And that was originally described to the government by Dr. Schatz. He was a co-discoverer of streptomycin antibiotic, and he demonstrated that in Chile, it was fluoridating its people in a poor community. They're poverty-stricken. They didn't have good diets. The fluoride increased the infant mortality rate in that area. And he convinced the president of India, of Chile, to stop it. And fluoride mortality rate went down when they stopped fluoridation. But years later, the fluoridation advocates got in there and got them to fluoride again. And as far as I know, they're still fluoridated. But he was the first to report to the government that it was increasing infant mortality when you fluoridate kids, fluoridate pregnant mothers. The recent data, this lawsuit in San Francisco is on the fact that we have a huge number of studies now from around the world, including the US, that prove that when a pregnant mother ingests fluoridated water during pregnancy, that if the offspring survive, and most of them do, they're going to have a lowered IQ. And so there's a litigation right now in court here in California and San Francisco on that very issue. It's been going on for a couple of years. So that's the study I wanted to do for a long time, and I finally did it. And I was surprised that it was such a clear-cut effect, but why should I be surprised? Fluoride is a toxic calcium chelator. When it gets into your blood, it sticks to your bones because that's where most of your calcium is, and you can't get it out. And it affects, Phyllis Malnick, some of the original work on the nervous system with rats. She administered fluoride at a dose that gave a blood level comparable to humans on fluoridated water, and the rats had trouble getting through a maze. It affects your brain somehow. And Dr. John Yamamanos, his book, he measured the amount of fluoride that's in your brain when you drink fluoridated water. It's in there. No tissue escapes it. And what is it doing there when the original purpose was to supposedly decrease dental decay? Why do we have to accept it in our brain or in our bone or anywhere else?
Right. So the government is setting the recommended amount of this chemical fluoride to put in our water, but they're not taking into consideration certain areas in the US have hard water, certain areas have soft water. Therefore, the toxicity is going to be much, much higher to those people compared to people with, more minerals in their water.
Yes, and I told the CDC that years ago. They immediately responded by saying, well, we're going to do our own study. So they did their own study, and they say, oh, see, with fluoride that's into the blood, when it's from calcium fluoride or sodium fluoride, it's the same. Well, they didn't even consider that what's really going on is in natural water that has fluoride at, say, a part per million. The fluoride in there didn't come from, it came from calcium fluoride, but that's not the only source of calcium in the water. There's calcium phosphate, calcium sulfate, calcium carbonate, all these sources of calcium in natural water. And all that calcium should have been in their study. They should have put it in there at a decent level. And then they would see, yeah, it's not assimilated well when the calcium is around. That's why it's used in clinical medicine during fluoride poisoning. We drink milk. So the CDC, and it's not the CDC in general, it's the Oral Health Division of dentists inside the CDC. They're just married to this religious belief system. You can't live without fluoride. You've got to eat fluoride. And it's just false. And, you know, since fluoride attaches to your bones, you can't get it out. Once it's in there, my recommendation is stop eating it. Stop drinking it.
And your study
Stop using
actually, your study measured the mortality rate of babies in soft water versus hard water. Is that what the study measured? And you found that it was higher mortality?
Right. Yeah, it was a strong correlation. And it's really disturbing. And, you know, I want to remind people that, you know, everybody who tries to say that fluoride, like a lot of people tell me, well, what's the big deal about fluoride at 1 part per million or now 0.7 in the water? Who cares when my toothpaste is 1,500? Well, that seems really rational, doesn't it? Why would you care about a measly 0.7? Well, it's because 50% of all the fluoride in your blood comes just from the drinking water. About 15% comes from toothpaste is not designed to be swallowed. You're supposed to spit it out. You drink water. You got to drink a couple liters every day just for normal health. Plus all the cooking that you do, soups, everything you make with fluoridated water. So the fluoride in the blood comes from mainly drinking water. If you stop drinking fluoridated drinking water and stop using fluoridated toothpaste because it doesn't work anyway, non-fluoridated toothpaste works just as well or better, then that eliminates about 65% of the fluoride in your blood right there. So you don't have to go out and boycott, you know, ask for a boycott of toothpaste. Just boycott it for yourself.
Yeah. And when you're cooking with fluoridated water, does it evaporate with the water or does it not evaporate?
It's not evaporate. I took a gallon right when they fluoridated our drinking water, I took my water distiller. I took a gallon of water, distilled it down, compared to a gallon of water before fluoride was added. The one that didn't have fluoride added, it boiled all the way down. You hardly saw any residue, just a little bit of leftover materials in there. The one that was fluoridated, because calcium fluoride is a finite solubility, once you get the water all evaporated down so it's concentrated enough, it all turns like milk. The water looked like it turned into something that looked like milk. And I dried it down, looked in there, I almost fell over from the stench. And so, you know, the fluoride is a substance that dissolves in water, but you can't get it out of water by distillation. Distillation just removes the water molecules as vapor. Fluoride doesn't boil away with water. It stays in the pot. So distillation is a good method for cleaning water of the fluoride. You collect the stuff that boiled over and leave the junk behind.
But cooking with fluoridated water sounds very dangerous because you're condensing it.
Technically, yeah, most people don't boil water down a lot, but your point is valid. You're not helping anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's get into then how to get this out of our water. You mentioned that distillation is a good way. What are some of the other best practices for getting this chemical out of our water?
Well, there used to be bone char that was made in Scotland was the method of choice to get rid of it, but I don't recommend that anymore because it's really getting harder to find. And there's a bone char that comes from South America that doesn't work because they don't know how to process it right. But the bone char from Scotland is made right. They've been doing it for so long. They made it for the sugar industry. They drain raw sugar in through the char and it turns it into white sugar. So everybody eats white sugar from that process where it's gone through the bone char to remove whatever it removes to turn it into the final product. And that stuff works. That'll remove the fluoride from water, as long as the flow rate's not too fast. But like I say, we're running out of it, and it's kind of a hassle. I recommend now, if you're stuck and you have no other source of water, besides the fluoride water to get like a General Electric profile reverse osmosis unit that fits under the sink. That works really well. We tested it for about 5 years and they're still working before even having to change the membrane. The old RO systems did not work. They reduce it a little bit. You could run it through 3 or 4 times to try to get it to work. But it took a lot of work in that, and a lot of engineering in that industry to get it so they could eliminate fluoride. They had to make the pore size really tiny to prevent fluoride from getting through. But the water molecule, which is about the same size, but it has an oblong shape, under high pressure, it can squeeze through the pore. They achieve separation that way. So, like these glacier water machines that we have in California, they probably have them all over the place. Those have the really pricey, $15,000 new RO units in there. You get water from there, there'll be no fluoride in it. You can buy distilled water from the store. You can buy spring water from the store to make sure it's been validated and checked to make sure it has no fluoride. And then some of those bottled waters are just city water that's been RO'd, and if it's an old system, it won't remove the fluoride. I shouldn't mention it. I don't want you to get you in trouble, but suffice it to say, it's not a simple matter to free yourself from fluoride if you don't have another water source. Here, I've been hauling water from a well over in Carlsbad ever since 2007. I go over there once a month and get 15 gallons of water and bring it home for cooking and drinking. And if you don't have something like that, I mean, don't get me wrong, if you're out in the desert, you have no other water but fluoride water, you have to drink it to stay alive. But just do what you can to avoid drinking fluoridated water.
And you do that instead of distilling? Is there a reason?
But the electric bill is going to go up if you use a lot of water. But I was about ready to build a solar water distiller. You can do those. Just get a little cheap solar panel, plug it into the distiller. It takes hours to distill a gallon, but you do it ahead of time. And then, you just always keep it running outside or wherever. So you can always get distilled water that way. They have, like Ohio Distillers, it's a good company. They make a really efficient water distiller for about $99. Looks like a big coffee maker.
Right.
And it's super efficient. I mean, if you put a gallon in, you get pretty much a gallon of clean water out, and the junk is in the bottom layer. It's impressive how efficient they are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a distiller, and looking, like, when I open it after it's all boiled out, like, you will never drink tap water again when you see what's in the bottom ends up left over in a distiller.
It's miserable.
Would you say most modern reverse osmosis now have the small pore size and the right kind of pressure, would you say? Are there certain better than others?
We tested the Costco system, and that one works too. So, that's the glacier machines, the GE profile, the Costco. So it's getting around. I mean, I was doing some testing for a lot of businesses around here before with fluoride electrode, and they thought they were serving their restaurant people that would come in to eat at their restaurant. They thought they were serving them fluoride-free water, and checked it for them, and it wasn't. They had been using the bone char from South America. So I got them to switch on that. But I was amazed when I went into a Starbucks and tested it, and it had no fluoride. I go, how do you make your coffee? What kind of water do you use? They go, we use city water. And I go, it can't be city water. You must do something to it. And they go, oh yeah, every Starbucks uses a reverse osmosis unit to clean the water before we make coffee.
Wow.
So Starbucks is fine. And so it is getting around. Now I wrote to Starbucks and I was really happy about that. And I talked to marketing. I said, this is fantastic. Why don't you tell people that you're getting rid of all these contaminants to make a delicious coffee? Why don't you put that as part of your advertising? And they said, it's a fantastic idea. Let's do it. They gave me permission to do it, to make a little flyer at a Starbucks logo, all this stuff, how fluoride is removed to make the coffee. And I was going to go stick it on some of the local Starbucks, but the local Starbucks, they don't want to get involved in politics, and they wouldn't let me put a sign up.
Isn't it sad how fluoride is politics?
Oh yeah, it's all politics. Oh, people are going to hate this program. I mean, it's just the way it is. What can you do?
Yeah, it's
you know what you want. Just don't force me to have it.
Right. It's when your health becomes political.
Yeah.
And you're forced to take a a neurotoxin if you drink tap water.
Remember the Hoover disaster, when he was killed, he wasn't alone. There were 300 people that were poisoned, severely poisoned. They had super bad stomach pain, chest pain. Many of them were life flighted to a hospital in a town, because it's a little remote village on the end of the Yukon River.
This is the fluoride spill in Alaska you're talking about, where they added accidentally, the system broke and too much fluoride went into the water supply.
Yeah, so 300 people were poisoned. And when I talked to the California State Chief Fluoridation Officer up in LA, who had just forced basically LA to fluoridate the water of the entire LA basin and North San Diego, he said, well, Richard, that wasn't fluoridation's fault when the guy was killed. I go, what was the fault? And he says, well, it was his wife's fault. I go, why was it his wife's fault? He goes, because he knew enough about it that he knew his wife was a nurse. And he said, well, his wife was a nurse. I go, okay. And he said, when he vomited the first glass of water up after he drank it, she should have known not to give him more. That was probably a fluoridation overfeed, and he shouldn't have given it to him. I said, well, you go to great lengths to tell everyone here in LA how safe this all is and not to even worry about it or think about it. How do you expect her to come up with this on her own? And he says, well, she should have done so. She's responsible. It's not fluoridation, because the active fluoridation is titrating in fluoride at the proper amount. Since that was up too high, that wasn't fluoridation. I go, I get it. And then he went so far as to say, after I told him, well, wait a minute, are you saying this lady went around the whole town of Hoover Bay and poisoned all these other 300 people? She's responsible for this? And he finally caught himself and realized how stupid that was. And he goes, well, I just do what the CDC tells me to do, Richard.
There it is.
Backs out of my way.
Wow.
He's retired now. He has a huge retirement income. And that was his job, was to make sure California was all fluoridated.
And I think that's important for people to understand. The fluoride is corrosive. So when they're putting it into the water supply in these water treatment plants, a lot of time they malfunction and the system breaks down. And there have been, I think the Fluoride Action Network has, lists all of the documented ones. And there are a lot where they say the residents of the town where these fluoride overdoses happened or the fluoride system broke down, they're not told till after the fact or weeks later.
Right. Yeah, there was a case in Wisconsin where it happened. And the water operator said, well, it's only 50 parts per million. So we know that when they drink the water, they'll just vomit that up. It'll be okay. It'll eventually come back down. No big deal. Didn't even tell the people. They actually think they have rights to do this.
And it's like, well, okay, if they're getting sick, but what about all the toxic effects that's happening to the rest of our body because of it? I mean,
they don't even think about it. In fact, that state chief fluoridation officer said that when I told them, you guys guarantee that it's safe and effective, but what happens on a long-term basis when it accumulates in your bones get weakened? What do you mean it's safe and effective? How can you sleep at night and tell people this? He goes, well, it is safe and effective. I said, well, what about the long-term effects? And he goes, well, we never said that. We never said that would not happen. It's just that it won't, he accused me of giving people the impression it's going to kill you if you start drinking the fluoridated water. I never said that, but he had that impression. So he said he had to make it clear that it's safe to drink. It's not going to kill you, but it eventually can. But he leaves that part off.
Right. Yeah.
There's no thoughts whatsoever about long-term effects of fluoride accumulating in your bone that never stops as long as you continuously drink it for your life. You drink 0.7 fluoride for about 90 years, you have no way to escape stage 3 skeletal fluorosis where you can't walk. Now, nobody has been exposed to that for 98 years in America yet, but it happens in foreign countries.
Right. And we also I also did an article in a show, and the fluoride they put in our water supply is also contaminated with arsenic, most of it as well. So there are contaminants in it that are known carcinogens.
Yeah, and the public health goal for arsenic is like 0. You're not allowed to put any of that into water on purpose. But because it's below the EPA's MCL, they think it won't cause any long-term issues. They just allow it. but technically the Safe Drinking Water Act forbids anyone adding anything into public water supplies other than what's needed, absolutely needed, to sanitize the water. You're in violation of federal law by dumping this stuff into the water, not just for the fluoride, but the other stuff too. Can I share my screen? I wanted to share this at the beginning, but
Absolutely.
yeah, for people who think that fluoride is not toxic, calcium fluoride is not a listed toxic because it's not soluble. All soluble fluorides are always listed on toxic substances registries because of their high toxicity. So I just want to make it clear to people. Can you see that screen?
Okay, now we see it. Yes.
This indicates what happens at different levels of fluoride that can exist in a person's blood. These numbers aren't exact. They're just trying to present to you roughly what is to be expected at these levels. So at Hooper Bay, Alaska, when he was killed from the fluoridation overfeed, his blood level was up there around 3 or 4 parts per million. So at this level here in your blood, if fluoride gets up that high in your blood, you're a goner. And the reason it happens is because fluoride, as we've gone over, is a calcium chelator. So 3.5 parts per million is just about the level that starts to precipitate calcium from your blood at the known typical 1 millimolar calcium levels that are in a person's blood. Now there's a range there, so I can't say 3.5 will always kill you, but I think you understand what the point I'm trying to make. 3.5 typically kill a person with acute heart block, because what people don't understand about the heart isn't like skeletal muscle. Heart muscle is completely different. It does not have its own sarcoplasmic reticulum to hold its own supply of calcium. It depends exclusively on extracellular calcium from the blood. It goes into the extracellular fluid. So when you have this lub-dub beating heart, the lub is because of the calcium, the channel is open and calcium rushes in there, interacts with the fibrils, causes the heart to contract. The heart immediately pumps the calcium back out because calcium inside a cell being too high like that is potentially damaging. And so it pumps it back out, and then you have the dub sound. So lub-dub, calcium rushes in, rushes out, rushes in, pump back out. If you don't have a normal level of functioning calcium available for the heart, that's it. So at 3 parts per million, when you just get to the level where you're going to start precipitating calcium, even though people who die of fluoride poisoning, they're not rare, but they don't have calcium fluoride particles detectable. What's going on is the fluoride is interfering with the free mobility of the calcium in solution. It's called chemical activity, chemical potential. Its activity is lower because the fluoride is in this water. Fluoride is interacting with the calcium ion in solution, and your heart just can't function right. You know, you have tons of calcium that has to rush in there during the plateau phase of the cardiac action potential. Fluoride at 3 parts per million in the blood, good luck. And that's been confirmed in vitro studies with intact beating hearts. Put fluoride in there, it's done at that level. Now, what happens at 1 part per million in the blood? Well, now you have a different type of toxicity. This happened when fluoridated water at 1 ppm was used in kidney dialysis wards. And that's in my Ph.D. article. You know, it's the fact that the FDA finally had to regulate the use of fluoride water in kidney dialysis wards. You're forbidden from using it anymore, because what would happen is when you're using 1 ppm fluoride water and you're dialyzing the people with it, they don't have normal kidneys. Well, their blood level goes up to the level that's in the water because you're replacing the blood with the water. And so, and the chemicals that they need in the water to kind of, dialyze the waste out of your bloodstream that the kidneys can't do. So their blood level was 1. And what happens at 1 is after, weeks, months of doing that, you have a different form of heart failure. It's the fluoride actually caused the degeneration of the tissue, of the muscle tissue itself. That's been confirmed by CDC's own publications and research animals. Certain level of fluoride in the blood, you get degenerated heart muscle. So that's what was happening to humans in dialysis wards that were treated with 1 ppm safe fluoridated drinking water. So the FDA banned that. That's what happens at 1. Okay, well, what happens at lower levels than that? Let's go down to say 0.2, 0.1 down in this area. Well, okay, that's what people are exposed to now in a fluoridated city when you're living continuously on fluoridated water. Well, now you got a different type of toxicity. Now, we don't have to go into it, but every city that started fluoridating in the early days when they monitored heart attack incidents, the heart attack incidents went up the year the fluoridation started in Evansville, all these cities, but people just ignore it because it leveled out again. But I think what's happening is those people that have really atherosclerotic plaques in their aorta, stuff like that, their cardiac vessels, the fluoride gets in there, does attaches to the calcium that's in there, and it will free up a particle, and you have a heart attack. You have a heart attack, blocking the artery. But that only happens to the people that are right on the verge of having this happen. Fluoride just does it. So don't believe that. That's fine. Don't believe it. I really don't care what people believe. That's what the data show. So at this level of fluoride, what happens is the toxic effects now are largely centered on where the fluoride goes. It goes to the bone, goes to the pineal gland, but in the bone, it incorporates into the matrix by ionic exchange. The fluoride doesn't reach, it's not at a level where it precipitates calcium from the blood, obviously. That was up here at the 3.5. But what it does is chemists have proven that it's an ionic exchange mechanism where the fluoride is able to bind more tightly to the hydroxyapatite in the bone better than a natural hydroxide that's already there. So it displaces it. It just interchanges with it. So anytime you're eating fluoride like this at low levels where it's not killing you, is what happens is your bone is slowly being converted from normal hydroxyapatite to fluoroapatite. It has a totally different crystal structure because fluoride isn't exactly the same size as the hydroxide. So the crystal size is different. And what happens is the bone, when you're in stage 1 skeletal necrosis, the bone starts to get thicker. And so you don't know what's going on, but it is going on. And it takes an expert. I mean, here people have done PET scans with fluorine to see where it goes when they inject it into the blood. It just latches onto your bone. Look at that. The spine, the hips, ribs, fluoride just can't resist sticking right to the bone. It's a chemical reaction that it can't be avoided. And it's in there and you can't get it out. It's biochemically not reversible. Okay, so normal hydroxyapatite has what is believed to be this structure right here. The fluoride just kicks out a hydroxide and it sticks there and hydroxide floats away. So that's fluoroapatite, which is a different crystal structure than normal. Okay, so we've already done that one. Okay, so now I want to go to this other one. Right here. If you want to see what fluoritic bone looks like in people who really have it bad, who've drunk, who've consumed fluoride at low enough levels not to kill them, but low enough levels to chronically go into the bone for long periods of time and accumulate. This is what it does to your bone. This is a normal tibia and fibula, lower leg bone. This is a person who died of skeletal fluorosis because the fluoride does this to your bone. See how thin this is and how thick this is? First, it changes the structure of the hydroxyapatite, making the bone thicker. And it may not have it doesn't have these spicules early on, but the process starts with your first sip. Fortunately, we have bones that can handle a lot of fluoride incorporated. So you're not poisoned, that's great, but the bone is being affected and it starts to get thicker. Eventually, you can have these little spicules stick out in stage 2 fluorosis and you start getting pain. Stage 3, it's so bad that you can't even walk down the road because these little swords are just sticking into your tissue. You're immobilized in bed.
But we don't have the picture on the screen. We have the
other one?
Numbers.
Okay, there's a normal leg bone up on top. Nice and smooth, clean, thin, like it's supposed to be. Here's the person who died of stage 3 skeletal fluorosis from low level, non-acute poison consumption of fluoride for a long, long time.
So low level meaning what's in the water supply?
I don't have the details on exactly how it happened, but it obviously wasn't from some industrial accident, something where he was swallowing enough fluoride to give him a heart attack, right, or heart disease. He died of the bone issue. And the only way you can get bone to be like that is continuous, long-term, chronic, low-level consumption. Like people in Turkey, India, China, there's a bunch of places where they just can't walk, even only in their 30s or 40s, because they've lived in an area that has high fluoride levels in the drinking water. Maybe 9 parts per million, which is about as high as they can go from natural calcium fluoride. They live on that water their whole life, and then they're trapped. But artificial synthetic fluoride, it's assimilated even better. But fortunately, it's only titrated in at 0.7 parts per million. But if you do the calculations, 0.7 parts per million, if you live to be 98 years old, you'd get up to a level that has bone, getting to look kind of like this.
Right, because it accumulates.
Yeah. So people say there's no stage 3 skeletal fluorosis in America. Well, that has not been proven, but it's probably the case. It might be the case. But yeah, we've only had fluoridation in Grand Rapids since 1945. Who's lived around here for 80 years on fluoridated water without ever missing a beat, continually living on it? Where are these people? Well, they're going to be coming, because who's going to stop fluoridation? Nobody. Yeah. Except yourself. Stop it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. We don't have any long-term studies here in the US to.
CDC doesn't care. Like that director said, it's not going to kill you. I've been drinking fluoridated water. It doesn't kill me. Well, that's just great.
And when you were talking about the heart, how it affects the heart, I was thinking, I did a show a while back on cardiovascular disease is what, the number 1, number 2 killer now, and it's exponentially expected to grow in the US.
Yeah. Why would you expose yourself to fluoride when you know heart disease is the number 1 killer? Makes no sense. So, there's plenty of time for people who live in a fluoridated area to stop using it. So just stop.
Right.
It'd be great. Cities would leave people alone, but they won't.
And you say that just cutting it out of the water supply is a good start. But it's also in our food, because it's in the soil, it's in the air, we water, we prepare food. What do we need to know about food? Are there certain foods that have higher amounts? Beverages.
Tea has a high amount, because tea is the one and only plant that incorporates fluoride from the soil, because tea lives best for whatever reason in acidic soil around pH 3 or 4 soil. So a lot of the fluoride exists as a minute amount of HF and hydrofluoric acid. Again, how does the plant stop that from going into the roots? Well, it can't. So tea has fluoride in. If it's in a fluoride containing soil, because it grows in acidic soils. I've checked a lot of the commercial teas, and they do have, like, when you make a cup, it's about 6 parts per million fluoride in a lot of the commercial brands. So I stopped drinking that a long time ago too. I use herbal teas, they're fine. Also deboned chicken. I didn't study it, but other people have. They said that, mechanically deboned stuff, I think little fragments of bone, little tiny bits, they're like powder, can get into the meat. So that's why bone having all the fluoride in the chicken, it's going to be in the meat when it's mechanically deboned, stuff like that. Yeah, but you can't keep it at 0. You're right. How are you going to do it? You live in America. You have to keep yourself alive by eating food that you can find and getting water that you can find. You're not going to keep it at 0. I mean, look at the tons and tons of fluoride, synthetic fluoride that's dumped into our public water supplies. It's immense. I mean, for every 30 tons of fluoridation chemicals that's dumped into a city water supply, there's 10 tons of sodium, 10 tons of silicic acid, and 10 tons of fluoride that are being put in the water supply. Okay, so none of those ingredients, none of them belong in fresh drinking water. Sodium is in the ocean, but we don't drink ocean water for that reason. It doesn't help you hydrate. There's too much sodium in it. A lot of people have sodium issues, high blood pressure. Who has the right to dump sodium into your drinking water, let alone the fluoride and the orthosilicic acid, which can leach lead from plumbing. We have lead plumbing issues in America, where plumbers thought that lead was so easy to work with. So let's just use lead pipes to put their water into the house. So silicic acid dissolves lead salts, ionizes them, so it increases lead levels in the water that comes into your house. But does the CDC care about any of that? Not a whit, nothing. Every time I write to them, I get nothing. I mean, I even wrote to them a basic question they admitted they couldn't answer, and they told me they'd get back to me, and they never did. And that was, if you look at the NRC report, it's another good book to read if you think that fluoridation is is harmless. Well, read this. Don't read anything else, read that. This is a government study.
That was a government study.
Yeah, it was ordered by the EPA. But the EPA told them not to touch water fluoridation. Don't give us any information on water fluoridation. Just tell us about, toxicity of fluoride, blah, 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 everything you have, so we can rethink the NCL that we're going to reissue, which they've never reissued after it was asked to be reissued. But in there, it'll show you, what was my point I was trying to make? I forgot now.
Just the toxicity of having it in our food. And
yeah, I mean, it was an important point that slipped my mind now because I got waylaid into the fact that it's ironic that the EPA ordered that study, but they're not doing anything about it after they got the study.
You're talking too about a question you asked the CDC and they couldn't answer it.
When you look at these results, you'll find that when a person is drinking fluoridated water at 1 part per million, what happens is his saliva level of fluoride, where the fluoride drains from the blood, goes into the saliva, the level is only 0.025 parts per million. Toothpaste is 1,500. So how is it that fluoride, when you eat it, can do what you claim toothpaste does, which is decrease dental decay, when it's 75,000 times less concentrated in the saliva that bathes your teeth? And they said, well, we don't know the answer to that. We'll get back to you. And they never did. And that's been 4 years. And
didn't they come out in 1999 saying that it's actually, that CDC did admit, saying it's topical, it works topically, not.
Exactly. Which is why I asked them that, because if it doesn't work systemically, why are we eating it?
Right.
Because if it only works topically, it's only 0.025 in the saliva, bathing the teeth. What good is that? And they have no answer. But they can't divorce themselves from their religious-like concept belief that you just can't live without eating fluoride. So they can't answer the question. They refuse to answer it.
Yeah, that's
and that's undoubtedly the dentists that are in the oral health division. It's not the CDC in general. I don't have any, issues with the CDC for the most part in general, but it's the oral health division that has just taken over all aspects of fluoridation.
Yeah.
Illegally.
Now, pharmaceuticals also have fluorides in them, which I was surprised. I was like, why do pharmaceuticals have fluorides? What do we need to know about pharmaceuticals and fluorides? And are there some that we should really be mindful of more than others?
Well, I mean, the ideal situation is you won't need medicines that have fluoride in them, so you don't have to worry about it. There are cases where people just have to have certain medicines that do work best because the chemists have figured out ways to put fluorine onto some of these organic medicines to make them, in some cases, more effective in achieving the job they want done. So the drawback is, our liver does not metabolize the carbon fluorine bond that's in all those drugs. So the carbon fluorine fragments just ooze everywhere, and they're lipophilic. They undoubtedly go into your brain myelin, into your fatty tissue. Who knows where they all reside and what they're doing. So the issue is if you had to take a fluorine medicine for a short time period to cure something, okay, hopefully you're not allergic to it. But the issue I see is with the statin drugs. A lot of the statin drugs are fluorine based, and yeah, they do inhibit the cholesterol synthesis enzymes better. But when you pay a price for it, you're going to have these CF fragments all over the place. Nobody knows where they're going. It hasn't even been evaluated. They don't come out in your urine or your feces. They're in you. And you keep taking these every day, the rest of your life to keep your cholesterol down. That's fine. But I mean, I have a liver that makes cholesterol like there's no tomorrow. I could just live on celery and water and it just pumps out cholesterol. So I've learned that I have to take a medicine, but I take a natural pravastatin. It's called pravastatin. Doesn't have any fluoride. It comes from a natural fungus, and it works just as well for me as the other statins. The other statins I couldn't tolerate. I did try them with fluorine for a little bit, but it gave me irregular heartbeats all the time. I just didn't want it. I stopped doing it. But pravastatin is fine. There's no fluorine in there.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, because I had a bladder infection. And I was treated once in the hospital with Levaquin without them asking me. They just did it by infusion, and I was allergic to it. It's a fluorine-based antibiotic that FDA approved for a while, but it's now been black boxed. And I wrote to them to try to get these drugs, that one off the market, but it didn't work. So there I was, me of all people, getting infused with this fluorine-based Levaquin antibiotic. And my back was all red with giant sores on it, all this stuff. And they said, oh, it must be the plastic tube. No, that's injections from plastic tubing many, many times. It's not that. It's the Levaquin, it's fluorine. So sure enough, it wasn't maybe a year later, the FDA black boxed Levaquin specifically. Wow. Because they're just intolerant.
Yeah, I read there's over 300 drugs that are fluorinated.
Yeah.
And growing, I'm sure.
FDA does the best they can. They approve things because they know people need help. You know, they approve it on the evidence they're given. But sometimes it just backfires. But, you know, when they black box something, at least they have some accountability there.
Right.
FDA has been opposed to fluoridation ever since the beginning of 1945. They went up there to Grand Rapids when they were meeting with the Surgeon General people from the Army, you know, dentists and all that. They were totally against it, but they didn't say one word because we're in the middle of a war. And they didn't want to, you know, interfere with the military. And, you know, the military had their ideas what to do with the sodium fluoride. Dentists had their ideas. They got together. The FDA was neutralized. But FDA has never approved any fluoride compound for ingestion, ever. We used to have fluoride drops. You can get them at the pharmacies and stuff by prescription. The FDA allowed it, but they never formally approved them because there's no clinical trials data available that prove that they even work, and they don't work. Wow. Now, the FDA did issue a category X rating for fluorides, which means you can't give them to pregnant women. You're not allowed to give fluoride drops to pregnant women. They also banned the sale of all fluoride compounds if they're intended to be ingested by pregnant women. That is on the books. FDA has never retracted it, but who is aware of that?
Yeah.
Tell me one person you know of that doesn't realize you're not supposed to be eating fluoride. So, and the FDA says so.
So we have it in our water. The EPA allows it. The PHS recommends it. The CDC promotes it, but the FDA has never approved it, and they
never will
allow pregnant women to ingest it.
Somebody's allowing it. The FDA doesn't go for it. No. I wrote once I was so upset one day. I just wrote to adjust a marshal up in LA. I said, why, you know, nobody wants to stop this stuff, but I know people are being slowly poisoned with this stuff. To me, it's illegal, a violation of law. Why can't we arrest some of these people? And he was interested. The marshal wrote me back. He said, yeah, I'm going to look into this. And some big attorney that works for the state. But then about a month later, he wrote me another letter saying, well, this is very complicated. And we can't get involved in interagency struggles. It's between the governmental agencies. It's not our issue. So, you know, the police are useless on it. Like I say, you have to ban it from yourself.
Right. And we discussed dental products and, you know, the harms of them. Are there any alternatives that you recommend that would be good to use aside from fluoridated dental products, toothpaste?
Well, yeah, I mean, any of the toothpaste that do not have added fluoride, they're fine. You know, sometimes, like if I'm traveling, I don't have any other stuff. I'll just dip my toothbrush in a bar of soap and wash out my mouth with soap. It's better than using fluoride. And you know, now we have hydroxyapatite toothpaste because teeth enamel. Remember, teeth enamel is not like bone. Bone hydroxyapatite, even though it's the same chemical formula, is nothing like teeth enamel that is the same chemical formula, but it's a different allotropic form to it. Teeth enamel is like window glass. If you can remove the enamel off your tooth and look at it, light goes right through it, just like a piece of glass. And it's super rock hard, really hard. And fluoride doesn't actually go into the matrix of the enamel. It's too hard. Bone, on the other hand, fluoride, like I said, ion exchange with hydroxide. And the first second of fluoride water, you're converting your bone into fluoroapatite. Bone is completely different than teeth enamel, even though they're technically the same chemical. It's just like, happens with carbon. Carbon in charcoal is totally different than carbon in a pencil, or carbon in diamond. Diamond is just carbon, the same element, completely different forms to the chemical. Same with, teeth enamel versus bone. Fluoride goes into bone, stays there, can't get into enamel efficiently. You look at the NRC data, they did studies looking at how much fluoride is in your teeth enamel when you drink fluoridated water. Well, they find some, but some of those studies, they didn't bother to wash off the calcium fluoride that's on the enamel before measuring it. Other ones, they'll report that they had 0.19 parts per million fluoride in the enamel, but it was only in the outer, 2 microns of thickness. It doesn't go into the enamel. And so there are scanning electron microscopy studies from Europe. They've shown that when you put fluoride on teeth, it combines with saliva calcium to make calcium fluoride that just makes little globules that stick into little pits and fissures on your teeth. It goes in there. As soon as you eat a meal or eat a few meals, it's all dissolved and you swallow, it goes into your bone anyway. It doesn't go into the enamel and stay there. So what is the point of it? Well, there is no point to it. So toothpaste with hydroxyapatite, that stuff's good because that's where your teeth enamel is. It's hydroxyapatite. Normal teeth enamel has no fluoride. But yet you see all these commercials on TV, remineralize your teeth with fluoride. Well, how do you remineralize teeth with a chemical that doesn't belong in teeth? Enamel doesn't have fluoride in it. So you can deposit another item on it, calcium fluoride, but that's not remineralizing the tooth. You're changing it. There's no point to it.
I think we've mistaken our marketing with scientific facts, with their marketing strategies, with actual.
The work that you do, you're digging into it enough to get to the truth. That's what people want. We just want the truth.
Yeah. Now you finished 2 articles, and we talked about one of them that you did that was published in the Journal of Environmental Toxicology. It was the one we spoke about with a high infant mortality in fluoridated soft water areas in the U.S. Do you want to share anything about the other study that you've recently done?
Sure, yeah, if you want to. This is the one of the key graphs in the infant mortality paper.
There we go.
Where, if you look at the ratio of fluoride to calcium, that as an index of hazard, because the more fluoride and the softer the water, logically I'd be expected to be more hazardous than low fluoride and high calcium, because it takes calcium to build strong teeth, not fluoride. So this is what happened. I plotted, this is data from about 70 million people in the United States, where these blue dots over here were states that are known to have hard water. And these blue dots were states that had soft water. Okay. And they're all fluoridated to a substantial degree. And so the ratio of fluoride to calcium, as it goes up, the infant mortality rate goes up with it. These are infants that do not make it after they're born. So, I mean, what can you say? That's a high correlation. R value of 0.694. I mean, I don't like it as much as anyone else does. No, everybody hates this stuff. Yeah. But what can you do? Go hide it? Stick my head in the sand? No, sorry. The paper I wrote just because I wanted people to know what kind of fluoride level you would expect to have in your bone if you regularly, faithfully drink fluoridated water for years of time. And so at 1 part per million consuming water for all these years, the fluoride level in your bone goes up to thousands of parts per million. Some people have bone pain at only 2,000. I know a person who had to have her hip replaced when the fluoride was only 1,500. She just couldn't tolerate the pain. So this arrow represents the traditional dose that is assumed to be associated with stage 1 skeletal fluorosis, as described in the NRC report. So, the deal about stage 1 is that's where your bones are thick and And it takes a guy who knows how to analyze x-rays of bones to see it. At this stage, this is stage 2 in this range, and see how it overlaps.
Right.
You know, 4,000, over 4,000 parts per million, you could have stage 2, which means you have painful bones. You have bone pain. And we have hip fractures in the elderly, you have weakened bone. NIH did a study proving that fluoride does not strengthen bone, because fluoridation advocates claimed that for a while. They don't anymore, I hope, because they kind of shut your mouth sometimes when it's false. So fluoride weakens bones, but it also can cause bone pain at this stage 2 level. This here is the range for stage 3. This is where you can't even walk. Stage 3, you're crippled.
And is the bottom numbers, the bottom X, is that years of life, or what is the?
This is only drinking 1 part per million fluoride. So 78 years or so living on 1 part per million fluoride, which hasn't happened in the US yet, but it's going to happen any day now.
So the bottom axis is years alive.
Yeah, you're in this range now. If you're going to consume fluoride the rest of your life, look out. And so then I did it also for 0.7 parts per million, which they adjusted it to.
Right.
And then whatever that is, but it's similar, it's just a little lower. But this is what happens. This is published by other scientists. They said when the water doesn't have any fluoride, it's less than 0.1. Well, still look at these numbers. You're up to 2,000 parts per million after a lifetime drinking water that's not even fluoridated, just because a little bit of natural fluoride. And that's natural fluoride that's not assimilated as well as artificial synthetic fluoride. Wow. So we have this bone issue with fluoride already, even if people left us alone. But they won't leave us alone. And none of them look at the bone. There's a whole giant book by Newbrun on fluoride and dental caries, big giant book. And he describes how all this stuff like this, showing the fluoride going into the bone, blah, blah, blah. And then he drops the subject. Doesn't say a word about it. It goes on about how great it is for your tooth decay. Well, what happens to your bone with all that crap in there? It doesn't just hide itself.
It's incredible. It's like, but you won't have cavities.
Yeah, not really help with cavity. Look at the John Yalmamanis data. It's really good. He has a really good book called Fluoride: The Aging Factor, and he spent a lot of years studying fluoride, and he showed that from detailed studies of all the data cities across the U.S. that every breakdown of age category, there was no improvement in dental decay when they had fluoridated water versus non-fluoridated. Now we can hardly even do studies like that, because where do you find the control cities that are not fluoridated?
Right.
All these dentists publish stuff all over the place saying reduces dental decay. You look at the data, and it's not even outside experimental error, the standard error bars. I mean, it's absurd.
And even if there are some unfluorinated places, you're still probably getting it in the food and the juices and tea. I mean, it's in the soil, it's in the air.
Yeah, and human anecdotal studies like that, they're just, they're really difficult to draw conclusions from. Mine wasn't bad because it's, 70 million people, but, and I was relying on data from the CDC, US Geological Survey. This is stuff that they've compiled over the years carefully. But I mean, trying to prove that fluoride reduces dental decay, good luck with that. I showed you the Ziegelbecker data up to 6 parts per million, no effect. Because you can't put humans in cages like you can with animals. Put humans in cages, and so you control what they eat, the candy that they eat, blah, blah, blah. You might be able to get somewhere, but who's going to do that? Well, you can't. But it's been done with animals, and there is no effect on reducing dental caries in animals in cages given fluoride. It doesn't work. But they all have dental fluorosis. The fluoride's getting in there.
And bone issues. I think back in 1925, who did that? John Hopkins did that study with the rats and fluoride.
Yeah, there's several of them, 2 in the US, 1 in England.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that have said over the years, oh, well, fluoride is a required mineral nutrient. Yeah, okay, right. And they believe this stuff. And it gets into one publication and somebody copies from that one and said, well, see, it was reported over here. I'm just citing what that expert said. Well, it's not a mineral nutrient. To prove something is a mineral nutrient, You have to raise animals without that nutrient for a couple generations of animals to see what happens. And they've done that with fluoride. It does nothing. If you have a zero fluoride in your diet, your water, completely fluoride-free environment, total fluoride-free, animals are completely normal, normal weight, normal everything for generations. It's not a mineral.
I was wondering how that rumor started, that it suddenly became classified as a nutrient.
Yeah, people still do it. We don't know what they're talking about, unfortunately. Everybody else pays the price for it.
Yeah. Now I'm curious, you've been at this battle with the fluoridation issue for a really long time. And from my research and talking to a lot of people, pretty much in looking back into history, pretty much every scientist, attorney, expert who's spoken out on the harmful effects of fluoride has been silenced, discredited. Some have lost their jobs, which reminds me of kind of what's happening right now with the pandemic in the last couple of years. Has any of this happened to you? Have you experienced any of these types of actions as well?
I can't lose my job because I've never been paid to study fluoride. My own time, and it's getting rough. But who else is going to do it?
Yeah.
People who do, but it's not working. So I just keep going. But there have been instances that have been pretty sad, like the California State Chief Fluoridation Officer, when he said, "I just do what the CDC tells me," Richard, he stopped communicating with me altogether, just completely stopped all communication, no more discussion. I've been in a city council person's office in San Diego. He asked me to come there to explain fluoridation to him, and all the ins and outs, what it does, what it doesn't. He wants to know because we were starting to fluoridate the water there. And all I said was, when he opened up, he asked me something, and I said, well, technically fluoridation is illegal. You can't add substances like that in public drinking water. And it was voted against twice in San Diego. Right. Citizens voted against fluoridation twice. And there was a city ordinance that was passed by Jeff Green. He's passed away now, but the ordinance 67 that forbids San Diego from adding fluoridation chemicals into the water. But as soon as I said it was illegal, this councilman just freaked out because he doesn't want to be charged with doing something illegal. And suddenly he acted like he knew everything. And he just blocked me from saying another word at the meeting. I was not permitted to answer another question. I kept raising my hand when I had an answer. He wouldn't call on me. That was it. That was the end of the story. So stuff like that happens.
I think an interesting thing, a word that I've learned along my journey and research into fluoridation, water fluoridation, is the word police power. That I found shocking as it pertains to fluoridation.
Oh yeah. Jeff Green used to use that term. I mean, it's policed. You can't stop it. When the city wants to do it, that's the end of the story. Good luck petitioning City Hall in downtown Los Angeles. Right. That's going to go wrong. Yeah. So now you can do, but I mean, sometimes we do win. I mean, my racehorse breakdown article, when that was published, the people in Rancho Santa Fe down here that have a lot of horses, they're not going to fluoridate their water. And luckily, they own the filtration plant for about 7 other cities. So those cities get water from Rancho Santa Fe, and they live today in a non-fluoridated area. Can you
tell us about that study actually with the racehorses? Tell us the premise and the conclusion.
Yeah, what it was a friend of mine here that lived here in Fallbrook nearby here. She owned these really expensive prize horses, show horses. And she moved to Pagosa Springs, Colorado, which is a fluoridated city, but they have really soft water there, super soft water, coming right off the mountain. And so she didn't realize that all the other ranchers there, all the other horse owners, did not use city water to give to their horses. They gave well water and whatever. But she started filling her trough with city water, thinking nothing of it. And after about 6 years, I think it was, her horses were all dead because the fluoride, and it was confirmed by a physician from Cornell. He went in there and said, these horses died of fluorosis. What is going on here? They had all this, just like, the stage 3 bone stuff that you saw in the picture. This isn't even their skin was degenerated. Just all this bizarre stuff happened to her. Really expensive horses. So she got upset, went to the water district, and that's a little town, and gathered a bunch of other ranchers with her. They went in there and they said, we don't want your fluoridated water. But the people inside, she said, saw them coming, and they gave a big old CDC full color brochure on how great fluoride is. And they said, we don't care. You're not going to fluoridate our water. And so they made it clear that it was going to be stopped. And my understanding is it's still now stopped in Pagosa Springs. And so, that kind of thing can be dramatic enough that the water district finally realizes, well, yeah, we don't know everything. Nobody knows everything, including me. Nobody knows everything. And so they realized they didn't know enough about it and stopped it. But what happened in Australia was a different story. They took my racehorse paper, and the lady took it to the city councilman, the mayor, whoever it was, the mayor, I think, and he read it and he goes, well, fortunately, we don't have any horses in our town, so we'll just keep fluoridating. So a lot of the work you do is almost worthless, but sometimes you do win, because I think Rancho Santa Fe and these 7 towns around here with all the horses, and I don't think they'll ever fluoridate, no matter how many people from the CDC go in there or some state health department demanding they fluoridate, they're not going to. And I left my paper with them for their files.
So do it for the horses, but not for the babies.
Right. But they just don't believe it's happening to the babies. They think it's just, like data I present, they'll be attacking me. They'll just say, well, I could have rolled the dice and the dice might have just made a straight line by accident. So it isn't really killing babies. In fact, they blame me for being hard on children because I'm preventing their dental care. That I've been accused of that.
You're giving kids cavities.
Yeah, it's my
person.
Yeah. But anyway, the horse study, the reason I did it is because of what happened to her. She lost her horses, and I knew that fluoridation was coming to LA in 2007 to these racetracks where they have horses that board there, and they're boarded there all the time. They never leave the track. They're going to be raised on this fluoridated water. What is going to happen to the races? So I did this really long 7-year study, again, all on my own time, 7-year study, looking at the horse fatalities, because the state has to keep a really detailed set of records for horse fatalities in all the racetracks in California. It's reviewed by the governor. At the time, I think it was Schwarzenegger. You review all this stuff, and you say, yeah, this track can keep operating, or this is recommended to be done. They're monitoring these horse deaths carefully. These are expensive horses. Anyway, and I looked at all the data, all the horse deaths before fluoridation started, after it started, during, while it was in action, and when it was lowered from 1 down to 0.7. And you wouldn't believe, you could tell the fluoride level in the water by looking at the incidence of racehorse breakdown fatalities. You could tell what the fluoride level must have been in the water. It was that close of a following. It was flat, hardly, very low level death rate. 99.6% of the racing starts were just fine. Fluoridation started at 1 part per million, goes up like this, the death rate. It lowered to 0.7, it came down here, and then the track shut down at Hollywood Park. So the study had to be stopped because nobody wanted to go see all the dead horses. They stopped Hollywood Park. It no longer exists. It's now SoFi Stadium for the LA Rams and the San Diego Chargers. There is no more horse. That had a huge history, beautiful history of famous racing horses there at Hollywood Park. It's no longer there. And they'll blame it on something else. It couldn't be the chloride, because nobody wants to argue against the city. So obviously it's not the fluoride, but it was. And people will say, well, no, you're wrong, Richard. There's not enough fluoride in the water at 1 ppm to kill the horses. And I said, well, I never said that. It's not causing acute lethality like happened at Hooper Bay. It's causing chronic lethality like what happened in Pagosa Springs to her horses over a 6-year period. And you got to realize that racehorses are very different than show horses. Racehorses, because of all the stress, the tension they're under all the time to perform well, they sense all this tension. They all have, almost all of them have stomach ulcers. And physicians have to investigate with a little stomach tube to look at the status of their ulcers at regular intervals to make sure you can still race them. They allow them to race with ulcers as long as they're not too gross. But can you imagine what would happen if a horse drank a whole bunch of fluoridated water, running as fast as he can, turns a corner, and he has a little heartburn from the HF because stomach acid is in their stomach, just like everyone else. Converts the fluoride to HF, which is an extreme corrosive, and he feels his stomach weirdness, and he has a little misstep. Well, that's it. That's the life of the horse, because horses are not saved when they break an ankle. They're just euthanized right there. So I never said the fluoride was killing the horses. I had to describe in detail so people would not continue to criticize. They would just throw away the study unless you come up with what the heck is may be actually happening. So it was a lot of work, but I'm glad I did it because I think the 7 cities here are going to be just fine. Wow. They know that it's not good for their horses.
Seems so backwards that we have to go to this extent to, prove that it's toxic and that it's harmful when it should have been proved. That should have been proven before they put it in the water. It's just, but like most things.
Here is a reporter. You are a reporter. You've dug into the truth. If they're so sure that it's safe and effective, where's the data that show it? You can't just rely on feelings. I think it's going to be fine. No, you got to have the data, prove that it does not cause IQ lowering in kids when pregnant mothers eat it. Prove that it doesn't, harm your bone. Let's see the data for years of time. I want to see it. It's not there. We have it now only by accident because they are fluoridating this. We're fluoridating people, and we're collecting this data as time goes on. And what kind of a state of affairs is that?
Right.
You act and talk about it later? No. That's not how science works.
Yeah, and it seems like the chemical industry gets away with that all the time. Now, we've touched on this a couple times throughout our conversation. We have the ongoing lawsuit that the Fluoride Action Network and several independent mothers and the Food and Water Watch, I think they're called. Anyway, they brought this against the EPA to ban fluoride in their drinking water. Based on your knowledge of historical fluoride cases as well as your experience, because there has been 3 prior cases where the Supreme Court swooped in after they've proven that it causes cancer and harms. What do you predict, or what do you think is going to happen with this January 2024 trial we have coming up?
Yeah, well, that was astute of you to know that, because you're right. There were 3 court cases where it was proven in court after detailed depositions for days that fluoride impairs survival from various cancers that you may have. They couldn't prove that it caused cancer, but it definitely prevented you from surviving. So it's affecting the immune system probably and your ability to fight cancer. And so that was proven in 3 separate court trials. One I know in Texas, one in Pennsylvania. But you're right, they were overturned by higher courts when the judge said, well, we got to stop fluoridating people. The higher courts went above that and said, no, courts shouldn't be in the position of deciding what people drink. So therefore, we overruled the lower court ruling. So the fluoridation continues, has its own little life. But how ironic is that? We can't control what people drink. So therefore, just go ahead and let them be poisoned.
And do you think this case is different that's happening right now where they're actually going after the EPA? Do you think there's a better possibility of some sort of positive outcome?
Well, one can only hope. I have my doubts, though. It is different because there's a lot of solid looking data now with almost no criticism at all from the opposing side that indicates that the IQ of offspring born from pregnant moms who use fluoridated water, their IQ is lower. That's been established in so many studies now in China, Mexico, Europe, US. We've got some really high caliber toxicology experts who testified at that trial. So in that sense, it's different, but in another sense, it's the same. Because when John Yamamana's testified, testified in court and he proved that, this fluoride effect on cancer recovery, that was really clear too. Now, and the case was won, but it didn't end up helping in the end anyway. And I have a feeling a similar thing will happen in this case because, the EPA, again, they don't feel they have to regulate stuff that's added into the water on purpose. Their job is to regulate industries that accidentally spill crap in the water. They'll do all that just fine. But when somebody titrates something in to treat human tissue, that's a different story. The EPA doesn't know how to regulate that. They don't think they have to. They don't think it's their responsibility. They're just requested to do it by the CDC. So my guess is what will happen is, the judge may rule in the favor of the litigants. And what will happen is the EPA will come back and say, okay, we're going to put out a warning in all these cities for pregnant women to avoid fluoridated water. And that could be the only thing that happens.
That'd be so sad. That'd be
It
terrible.
is.
I feel I was talking to the actual attorney who litigated the 3 past cases, Mr. Graham, and he's now retired. And I asked him, I said, what needs to happen? And he said, it's Congress, and we've had multiple congressional hearings, the Delaney hearing and multiple more where it's been brought up and Congress has done nothing. And he said, it's Congress that needs to make the decision at the end of the day.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they would. I mean, I've written to senators in California and other people and they all want to do something, but there's a big difference between wanting to and actually getting in there and actually doing it. It's a monumental task to actually do it. And even in the state legislature, they only, these state senators and stuff, they only have a certain number of cases they can bring before the legislative body to bring up for consideration. And they don't want to waste the ones they want to do on this fluoride stuff. And we'll probably lose anyway. And so there's just this gigantic boulder sitting there you can't get out of in order to get legal action to take place. And besides, we already have legal action. We have the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Right.
And people override it anyway somehow. And the police won't get involved to enforce it. Who enforces it? Even if we had a law saying you can't mandate fluoridation anymore, who stops people? Who physically goes there and stops them and makes them turn the tap off?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, my advice to people is, again, don't drink it anymore. But another idea is to just tell your water district, that you're going to send them a bill for all the water that you have to buy that's not fluoridated because of your issues with it. And you're forcing your home to have it that you don't want it. It's not a product you don't want to pay for. You're paying for it because you have to wash clothes and stuff. But send them a bill for the water that you had to buy to keep your health. Try that.
It's a great idea. Yes, it's for a lot of research. It's concerning how powerful the big industry and chemical industries are in terms of policy and government in our country.
Yeah, like you say, it's a police state. The police won't help you, but they'll help these agencies.
Yeah.
Because it's a cultural thing. People think you just can't live without eating fluoride.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Richard. This was such an informative conversation. Thank you for sharing your science, and thank you for all this studies and research that you've done on fluoride toxicity over the many years, and for being just a great voice in this whole battle for helping, get the word out there and helping to try to protect the health of all Americans. We really appreciate that. Before we wrap it up, do you have any final words to share with everybody about fluoride and fluoride toxicity?
Well, just like I said, fluoride is a calcium chelator. That's why it was used for a while as a rat poison, a rodenticide, a pediculicide. It doesn't belong in you. It doesn't have any purpose in you. And so, it goes in your bones. It won't come out. So it's time now just to stop ingesting it. Because the level you have is the level you've got. You can't do much about it, but at least you can prevent it from getting worse. because it will continue to accumulate the longer you use it. So just don't use it.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
If you like this
Welcome.
video, please like and share it with others. This information could really help somebody you may know. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to be sure you don't miss out on our future shows. And I will see you all next Wednesday on the next episode of Discovering True Health.